Making the most of your pensions as an expat. So the first point here is state pensions. Every country is going to have the minimum requirements for a state pension. So in the UK, it's 10 years. Other countries can go as high as 20 or 25 years. So the reason that's important is because you need to meet the minimum to get anything in that country. As long as you meet the minimum in one country, there are sometimes the opportunity of merging state pensions together. So let's just say, for example, you don't have to be a British passport holder. You just have to have at least worked in the UK for 3 years. If you meet that requirement, you can then top up to at least get the minimum of 10 years. So me as an example again here. So in Spain, it's 15 years, UK is 10. If I meet the 10 years in the UK and the 15 years in Spain, I can claim those separately. And you often get more by claiming them separately as opposed to merging those together. And that just means you can utilize vehicles in different countries, different state pensions from different countries. I mentioned here about double taxation agreements and why that's important to look at as well. So in the US, for example, there's something in the double taxation agreement between the state pensions in the UK and the US that stipulates there is a reduction. It's called the windfall provision, based on how many years you've been a tax resident in the US. So again, every country is going to be different, but there are offshore opportunities that you can take advantage of. And the biggest one for sure is topping up the UK state pension from abroad, because you can pay into what's called Class 2 contributions, which means it only costs you just under £180 for a year's contribution. And for every year, you're just getting roughly over £300 income. So you've only got to live 6 months past state pension age to get your money back, and everything after that is free money. So it's certainly worth something taking advantage of. It sounds good to be true. Will they close this loophole in the future? Potentially. And they are actually reducing how many years you can backdate in the following tax year. So as long as you've filed a form with HMRC before the next tax year begins, you can still take advantage of backdating if you have been an expat for multiple years. The next point is workplace and private pensions. So what you want to do in the country where you're living is look at what the annual contribution limits are. Some of these countries could have high limits, some could have low, some could have almost nothing. So it is really important to find out what these are. The UK and the US have really, really developed private and workplace pension structures, whereas Europe, where I'm living, it really doesn't, because the maximum I can pay into per year is €5,750. And that is actually quite difficult to find, to increase that limit, because you have something called a plan de pension where you can pay €1,500 in. Everyone can do that. But the other 4,250, you can only do that if your company offers it, or if you're self-employed and you have found a pension scheme that offers that type of pension scheme. So other countries don't have that much of a developed market, which means you end up having to save with money that's already been taxed into potentially a high taxable vehicle. So you don't get the benefits of what you do in other countries like the UK. The difference between workplace and private can be quite big, and this would depend on, for example, looking at the charges, the investment options you have, and what the flexibilities are when you retire. So it's really worth looking at what these different options are. The last point here is tax planning. So you want to make sure that you can fit your pensions into your retirement plan, and you actually are comparing this against what other assets you have. Because a pension, generally, most pension schemes around the world would then come out as income tax. You get tax relief on the way in, so it's certainly worth taking advantage of this. And let's just say, for example, you were paying 50% tax. Okay, I often hear the example of, well, why don't I just take my pension out, buy a property, an investment property, and then I can use that as an investment. You forget the main problem there, which is if you're paying 50% tax and you've got 100 grand in your pension and you've now only invested 50,000, you have to make 100% return to get back to square one. So that's obviously not a good option. And likewise, if you're making contributions into a pension, or you're comparing that to invest into a taxable vehicle, it's the same scenario. If you're investing in a general investment account and you've paid the money in after taxes and you're left with 50 grand instead of 100, you're way better off putting it into a pension, even if the pension scheme isn't as attractive with regards to the investments you can buy. The last point here is UK and US pension restrictions. So if you have a UK pension or a US retirement plan, when you leave your country, so when you leave the UK or the US, there often are restrictions. So the first point here is drawdown or distribution options. We get multiple people inquire on our website who have already moved, and then they find out they've got no access to the pension. Or, for example, for US retirees, they could get a message from their 401k provider saying they've got 90 days to find a new provider. These types of problems are really, really stressful. And the UK one is based off of Brexit. So before Brexit, people had full access, but when Brexit happened, it shrunk the options that were available. So things like annuities, you can pretty much guarantee that you won't be able to take one. But then taking flexible drawdown, your paperwork may say that you have the option. But if you bring them up and say, I'm a tax resident in France or Germany or Asia or wherever, they may end up turning around and saying, right, the only option you have is to take all of your pension in one go. And it's not a case of, right, well, I've got an Aviva pension, my wife's got an Aviva pension, I'm only going to bring up based on me, because there could be 100 different Aviva schemes. One may say yes, one may say no. It really is down to the actual particular scheme itself. The second point here is inheritance tax. So there have been big changes to the UK for inheritance tax, and the options that you have within a UK pension are to take it as a lump sum or to transfer the pension on death to a dependent pension. If you take the pension as a lump sum, if that's the only option the pension scheme offers, then on death, the beneficiary is going to inherit that and pay tax, inheritance tax. And if they're outside of the UK, there could be additional taxes on top of that. So having the option of moving into a dependent pension is really beneficial, because it moves from one pension scheme to another. It's not a taxable event. So you really want to look at the scheme rules to see if that does apply, because you've got inheritance tax, income tax. You don't want to be taxed twice and end up losing 2/3 of the pension pot. The inheritance tax you can no longer avoid, but income tax you can. And again, if your scheme says that they have that option, it's finding out whether that option is available as a non-UK resident. For the US, it's not that difficult because the pension schemes aren't as restrictive, but again, it's worth finding out what the options are. The last point is investment selection. So it's a good comparison here, the UK versus the US, because every country is going to have a home bias. Okay, so if you look at the UK, it's been the worst performing stock market of the developed markets worldwide for the last 10 years. You stretch it out to 2000, so almost 25 years ago, and it's hardly gone up. Compare that to the S&P 500, it's up almost 400%. So by having the UK bias in the US, it's favoured people massively because that's where the growth's been. So what you need to do is find out what your pension schemes are invested into. And what we do is we offer an extra review. We give you a comparison of all of these points. So let's just say you've got no drawdown options, you have to transfer. If the inheritance tax options and the tax on death are not beneficial because you can't move the pension into another pension, you have to transfer. If the investment selection is really poor and the growth's been poor, and we can compare that against something that's performed better, then maybe that's a reason to transfer as well. But the first 2 points is almost a given. If you do have that problem, you need to transfer. And the only way you can do that as a non-UK resident is to do it through a financial advisor like ourselves.